All right, Siddhant, I'm David Chen. You're listening to Decoding TV. Let's talk about She-Hulk Attorney at Law, Season 1, Episode 5, Mean Green, and straight poured into these jeans. Overall thoughts on the episode, Siddhant. What'd you think?
Very light, very repetitive, very silly. But at this point, that's kind of what I'm okay with out of this show.
Mm-hmm.
It's not the kind of thing where anything of a whole lot of consequence really happens, but it's a breeze. You wake up on a Thursday morning, you want to watch something over breakfast. The episodes are like 25 minutes long, not including credits. You're like, yeah, this could be a fun Thursday morning watch.
Yeah, I think that I agree that it's a fun episode, and I think that the formula that the show seems to be establishing for itself is there is a court case each week, and then like other characters go off on a different adventure, and then
Mhm.
maybe they might be connected. That seems to be kind of the formula that is being established each week.
Yeah, and not a single fight scene this week, which is fine.
This episode is kind of rough in some ways because it's extremely similar to last week's episode in terms of themes. And actually, like it really just feels like the release schedule of these things. And I've made this point before, but like feels very stretched out because this really feels like these two episodes should have been released at the same time. You know what I mean?
Mhm.
Last week's episode and this week's episode, like they have the same characters in them. They're extremely similar thematically. That theme being that Jennifer Walters needs to accept that she is now She-Hulk and will forever be known as such. And she needs to kind of reappropriate that name for her own usage and to empower herself. Same theme as last week's episode, and made a slightly different way this week.
Yeah, but no Madison, so it's a step down.
Exactly
No
right.
Wongers either.
100% agreed. So in terms of plot, I mean, there's other shows out there that other podcasts out there that like dissect every single Easter egg of the show, and that's obviously not what this podcast is. We generally do a good job of like recapping what happens each episode, but not that much actually will happen. So we are going to instead use this episode as a jumping off point to other discussions
Mhm.
and philosophizing around the MCU. But let's talk briefly about what happens in this episode. So at the end of last week's episode, we found out that Titania was suing She-Hulk because of trademark infringement. She-Hulk was using the name that Titania theoretically owned a trademark for. And this episode follows two separate plots. One is She-Hulk's attempt to get back her name by proving that she was using She-Hulk as a name long before Titania was using it. And also, Pug and Nikki go off on a quest to get She-Hulk a better outfit. That is the secondary plot.
Mhm.
And to be fair, there's some really cool stuff with that, with the guy that they find to get the outfit. Like I thought the performance was really, really amazing. And I really enjoyed that guy's name, who is escaping me at the moment. But do you know who I'm talking about? The guy who plays the sartorial expert.
Yeah, so the character's name is Luke Jacobson, but the actor's name, I am speaking very slowly for
Griffin
no
Matthews.
reason.
Griffin Matthews.
Yes, yeah, it's
Absolutely brilliant.
not because I
Yeah,
was trying to look it up myself. Yeah,
absolutely brilliant performance, I thought. A true delight to witness in this
yeah.
episode. And then what's also, there's a lot of weird stuff going on in the show right now, Siddhant. I mean,
Mhm.
weird stuff in terms of timeline, because we are meant to believe that She-Hulk had her dates before Titania launched her product line and then sued She-Hulk for trademark infringement, right? Because the
Yeah.
whole point is that she was using her name before that. But the dates happened last episode, and at the end of that episode is when she got sued for trademark infringement. So I think in the time between when the dates ended and the end of last episode, Titania launched her entire line of products and then sued She-Hulk, right? So
When so going back to when we started this podcast, you mentioned something about the episodes feeling like, or maybe even being like, chopped up out of order or something, and
Right.
and you really get a sense of that this
Well,
episode
also,
because
like, why is Titania not in jail? Like, did that get resolved in the last few episodes that I didn't
I
see it?
mean, it's all kind of just happened off screen. Like she's in jail now, she's out, and
She's
like
out, I
again,
guess.
we're
Yeah.
we're halfway through, right? And yeah, they did kind of bring it up, but like they didn't really address it. But we're halfway through the season, and I don't know like a damn thing about Titania.
Yeah.
Like, what was she doing in that first episode, 5 episodes ago, bursting into a courtroom? Who was she trying to attack? What is happening with that character? Like, who
Because
is she?
she's ostensibly like one of the main villains of the show, but like
Yeah,
we're now 5 episodes in. We don't really have a villain, right? Like,
yeah.
or any kind of season long conflict, and that's okay. Maybe that's not the direction the show's going in, But it does feel really out of order. Like
Yeah,
what's
because
going on? Yeah,
it was also in episode 3, at the end of episode 3, that She-Hulk was attacked by somebody with Asgardian weapons, a group with Asgardian
yeah.
weapons, and they
Trying to
refer,
like get her DNA or something like that, right?
yeah, and they refer off screen to like their boss, and like
And we're now at the end of episode 5, and we have no idea who that is.
yeah, like it
Maybe
doesn't even come up slightly.
maybe it's Griffin Matthews who plays Luke. Maybe it's Griffin Matthews' character. What do you think
He
about that?
he doesn't really know about her for some reason. Like
Yeah.
everyone's talking about her, she's in the news, he doesn't know about her. You'd
Yeah.
think that he would have his ear to the ground when it comes to new superheroes, though.
You would think that, and then Renee Elise Goldsberry shows up in this episode, and that's cool.
Finally.
She was in about 10 seconds of the previous episode,
Yeah.
but then they have like a weirdly sort of standoffish confrontation with each other. They have a weirdly confrontational vibe. She's like, "Okay, I'm gonna be your lawyer," and that's that. And it's like, okay, do these people have some kind of history with each other? Because we just met them like 5 minutes ago,
Mhm.
So it's very. I guess you could assume that because Jen's been at this law firm for a while, like she's been making waves, but we don't see any of that on screen. So I think the timeline and who the villains are and the long running storylines of the show, we're 5 episodes in. I think it's safe to say it's a bit of a mess. It's a bit of
Yeah.
a mess.
And it's not only a mess in like an overarching sense, but also like this episode itself has a lot of weirdly like messy and choppy editing that makes it kind of, let's say, interesting to watch. Like, of course,
Mhm.
you have the same thing happening of like, well, She-Hulk transforms off screen and all that, but like they start doing the same thing with Titania, where like every time she speaks, it cuts away. So I'm thinking like, has all of Jamila Jamil's dialogue like been ADR'd or something? Because like I think 90% of what she says, like like whenever she's speaking, like the camera is on another character.
Yeah. Good catch. But the other thing is also like we're going off on adventures with like Nikki and Pug, and
Yeah.
we know very little about those characters, and so this show will live and die basically based on like the personalities,
Yeah.
and I find them enjoyable. I like enjoy hanging out with those characters, but I could totally see if you did not that it would just not work at all, right? Like because you know so little about them, you just need to go based on vibes, basically.
Yeah, like this was like the best part of the episode for me was Nikki and Bug's quest to get Jen a new outfit, and that they're fun to hang out with. But if they were showing up every week and doing something like that, and we had no way of knowing anything more about them, that would start to become a bit of a problem. Just because, like, let's say this is their like first adventure together, so to speak. Everything that's happening gives you a little bit of sense of who they are. But in a comedy like this, where all the humor sort of emanates from who the characters are, you would need to know more about that to get more of that comedy. So I think it works for like 1 week, but going forward, we would need to like they would need to be actual characters rather than just these broad types.
I would agree with you. So I wanted to talk about this article that Matt Singer published over at ScreenCrush.com. Which is entitled "She-Hulk Takes Marvel Out of the MCU and Into the Real World." And he writes about how, quote, every couple of years after a big comics crossover, the X-Men would stop whatever they're doing and just play baseball. Wolverine, Cyclops, Storm, and the rest of the crew would take to the field behind Xavier's school of gifted youngsters for a friendly game. Powers weren't typically allowed, but of course there was always a cheater or two who used them anyway. The relative calm of those baseball issues never lasted long before Magneto or Mister Sinister threatened to showed up to threaten the free world again. But they are always my favorite X-Men stories as a kid. They were designed to give readers a breather between epic storylines and to reestablish the characters' relationships. End quote. Anyway, he's talking about how like not every comic story needs to be about a character saving the world, right?
Mm-hmm.
And he goes on to say, quote, Marvel heroes lived in the real world, and the best Marvel books examined their impact on that world in fun and thoughtful ways. That I have come to realize is the reason I like She-Hulk, Attorney at Law on Disney+. It's basically a whole show driven by the same storytelling impulses behind the X-Men playing baseball. Fight scenes are rare. This week's episode had none at all. Some episodes don't have a traditional supervillain. Others subvert our expectations about them, like when Tim Roth's Abomination showed up. End quote. And then he goes on to then say that this show has addressed things like, quote, She-Hulk has already considered the impact of people with powers on dating, healthcare, technology, fashion, beauty, trademarks, and the penal system. It shows us what ordinary magicians do in a world where there's an honest-to-goodness sorcerer living in Greenwich Village, and it's revealed where the Avengers get their durable, stretchy costumes. And it's barely scratched the surface of where a show like this could go, end quote. I agree that there's huge potential in a show like She-Hulk, Attorney at Law, depicting what the impact of superheroes would be on the real world. I will say, I think that these issues can probably only be explored at a surface level for a show with this kind of tone. Because
and runtime as well.
Yeah, and runtime. But even generally, like, in my opinion, Siddhant, a world in which the MCU would completely destroy our modern justice system as we know it. Like there's no way it would ever function because reasonable doubt would always be on the table. Oh, did you murder that person? Is it possible that Doctor Strange opened up a portal and chopped them in half with the portal, and then and that's why they're all in two pieces, bloody on the ground? Is there a reasonable doubt that that could have happened? 100%. Did you know where Doctor Strange was at the time?
Damn.
Nope.
You really thought this through.
Yes, I have, Siddhant. Thank you. And so I think that it would just wreak havoc with a lot of our established legal principles in a way that I think could actually be explained, but is not in the MCU. I do think the trademark idea is an interesting one because She-Hulk is one of the few characters that, as Renee Elise Goldsberry character points out, doesn't use her actual name in, as her superhero self. Unlike Thor and Doctor Strange.
Mm-hmm.
Although they haven't gone over Spider-Man or anything like that. But anyway, although maybe he doesn't exist in this universe yet, right? Or people don't remember him. But no, that's not true. I think they know who Spider-Man is. Anyway.
They just, Peter Parker.
Peter Parker. They don't know who Peter Parker is. Yeah. So what do you think of She-Hulk as a way of showing what superheroes' impact on the real world would be?
I'm completely with Matt on this in that, it is the show that is, even though there's more potential for it to dig deeper, it is the first one that really tries to get into all like the nooks and crannies of like what's going on behind the scenes and all that. You did get a sense of that to some degree with Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D., but that was more like, okay, who are like the Avengers cleanup crew? You do get some of this perspective actually with Miss Marvel, which I know you haven't seen. But that again is very focused on like a couple of characters and their relationship to like, superhero fandom and all that, and then it becomes its own thing. But this is the one that exists adjacent to all the superhero lore, but isn't in and of itself like a big superhero event, which is good. And he makes a really good point about the comics because so going back to around the mid 2000s, the event comic started to really become Marvel's bread and butter. You had things like Avengers Disassembled, which was this sort of Wanda-centric, story of like, which led into this other Wanda-centric alternate reality story called House of M, which was about like an alternate universe, and that in turn led to Civil War, which conceptually you might be familiar with, like this huge factional war between like superheroes. But the thing is, every time Marvel would do one of these big events, there would be not only a fallout, but there would be these side comics to see how these events were impacting things on the ground for like lower level characters and all that. But as time went on, into the late 2000s, the early 2010s, and gosh, especially now, like a big problem with Marvel Comics is in order to like get new readers on board, it's just like event, 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 event. And granted, I haven't, kept up to date with like every single Marvel comic being published. So I'm sure there's something out there that does function this way, the smaller on the ground stories, but a lot like the movies, it's just big event, big event, big event, and less of the focus is on the in between stuff like this. And it was actually our friend Patrick Willems who, in one of his video essays about the Marvel Cinematic Universe, said that the D23, sorry, beg your pardon, the Disney Plus shows have the potential to fill in these gaps, the things that are happening in between the events. And She-Hulk is the first one that really feels that it actually fulfills that purpose,
Mm-hmm.
because it's like one of those, it's like a fan fiction prompt each week, like, well, what if there was a legal case about, so and so? What if there was a trademark case? It's not about like a big battle or the world ending. It's just these like little brain tickling sort of questions, like, what would happen in this universe if this person met, a magician who was trying to, get by in a world of sorcery.
Yeah, but it's there's a show called What If that does similar things, but I think what is unique about She-Hulk is the kind of mundane situations, right? The
Yeah,
idea
well,
that it's a single female lawyer who is going through these events. Like she had her own very normal adult life, and then this superhero thing collided with her life, and like she's trying to make sense of it.
yeah. Whereas
Yeah.
the What If show is still more about like,
Yeah, superheroes meeting
what if,
superheroes in big epic
yeah,
things.
what
Right?
if Black Panther was Star Lord? Which
Yeah,
first time I heard of that, I thought it was genuinely like a joke. But like it's still about like the big superhero event
right,
stuff. This is
right.
about the on the ground stuff.
Yeah, yeah. And I do think that some of the stuff that it does, the trademark thing, I think is actually like a clever plot line. The dating stuff, I think, is actually pretty well done as well, and feels pretty realistic, true to life, well thought through.
Mhm.
But there's other things that probably would be really different. And the other thing is the job hunting stuff. Like you can imagine being a superhero, there would be lots of people who would not want you to be working for them, and other people who would want you to be working for them, but would want to use that part of you, right?
Yeah.
And so that's what I like. Those are some elements of it that I really like. Um, I do think like the idea of the penal system or the healthcare system, that's what Matt Singer also mentions. Like, I don't know that it really explores those in a meaningful way, but overall, I think that's kind of what the appeal is for the show, is that it shows you the in between moments when like not epic stuff is happening. Like, I think it's becoming pretty clear by this point in the show that there's not going to be some big world ending thing
Mhm.
necessarily. Certainly not one that's going to take a lot of effort to address, because each episode's only 30
Yeah.
minutes and there's not that much in terms of long running plot lines per episode. So,
I would have loved to have seen a little bit more about the actual She-Hulk by Titania line of beauty and wellness products, because the episode opens with a pretty spot-on recreation of what one of those product lines looks like in his advertising.
yeah.
And I thought that was pretty great. But like, apart from a few jokes about like what she's selling, we don't actually get to see that. So I really wanted to see like what is it that people are shelling out all this money for, you know?
Well,
But
I think the point is that to me, it struck me as kind of a Gwyneth Paltrow Goop parallel, where it's like
Nikki's into it, so
a lot of stuff of questionable value, but people are still really into it. And it has somebody who's very famous behind it, who, by the way, 4 episodes ago went on a massive rampage that probably could have killed people. But we're not really talking about that anymore.
and I will say I like that, when Jen is commenting on these products in the showroom, she's like, I don't remember the exact words she uses, but like, is beauty this, beauty that? Like, what's the difference between this? And for a second I was like, oh, are they gonna go like the I'm not like other girls route? But then Nikki's immediately like, no, there is a difference. It's like, whew, all right, thank you for rescuing this plot line for me, Nikki. I love you.
Any other things to mention in terms of details or things we liked about this episode? I liked that the boba place was called Boba, Beau, Ba. That was pretty awesome. And always nice to see like an East Asian character in the MCU, and she speaks Chinese to him, which by the way was good Chinese,
Mhm.
pretty decent Chinese. And the guy was like, "I'm not Chinese," which is like an awesome Been there, been there. I mean,
Which dialect was it?
I am Chinese, but
Yeah.
I've been. It was Mandarin she was speaking.
Okay.
Yeah.
I
But
like that. I like that character sells knockoff Avengers and Avengers merch with
mhm.
like a purple Hulk on it who seems to have a mustache. It really reminded me of this Cartoon Network show that I used to watch growing up called Dexter's Lab. I don't know if you're familiar with it, but there was this sort of subplot kind of separate story about like this Justice League Avengers knockoff called the Justice Friends. Are you at all familiar with this?
Mm-mm. Mm-mm.
Okay, so there were these three characters: Major Glory, who was like a Captain America type with like an American flag
Mhm.
as like his cape, and he had like a winged eagle helmet. His friend Van Halen, who was a Thor send up, except he had like this really cool like metal guitar. And my favorite of the three, a purple Hulk knockoff called the Infraggable Crunk. And it looked to me like the Infraggable Crunk was on these Avengers and Avengers t-shirts.
Amazing. That's
Yeah.
amazing. Going back to our conversation about this depicting superheroes in real life, a show like this, I do think that does make the rough CG really a sore point for the show, and
Oof.
because the problem is that the strength of a show like this is to show, hey, these mundane, small, quiet moments between people when they're not trying to save the world. Like, that's nice. But in order to do that, like, the level of difficulty of CG is almost higher. Like, they need to completely blend in with these like regular, normal environments.
Yeah.
They're not fighting each other on an aircraft on a aircraft carrier in the sky, right? They're like in a courtroom or a law office, and they really need to just like blend in, and you need to believe that they are who they are. And in the case of this, it's real. I'm just talking about She-Hulk as a character. Okay, that's the only one I'm talking about.
Really?
Yeah, and I do think like, I believe that, yeah, this is a cool idea, but I think that the CG is really hurting the execution of that idea.
Yeah,
So
at one point Titania refers to her as Shrek, and it's like yeah, I mean, she's not wrong there. She does look like an early 2000s, CG animated
just
character.
you're just in terms of like CG quality, not in terms of looks, right? Is what you're
Yeah.
talking about. Yeah.
Yeah, except every
Um,
week, like the design of She-Hulk tends to get a little more uncanny. Like her head tends to get a little bigger, her hands tend to get a little
it
bigger.
is
There's
like,
something off.
it doesn't feel consistent from week
Yeah.
to week. Anyway, okay. So what else to highlight about the episode?
So I will say one thing
yeah.
about no. Go ahead. Go ahead. You go ahead.
Well, I was going to ask you. At the end of the episode is she needs to call up her past dates to testify about the dates that she had and what she did on
Yeah.
those dates. Here's a question. If you stood to lose possession of your public name, and in order to prevent that from happening, you had to call up 5 of your old dates to testify in court about their experiences with you, would you do it or not?
I think I would probably just because I haven't I haven't gone on like too many disastrous dates, but that's just me. I feel like most people probably wouldn't. Um,
Yeah,
that's a tough one.
I don't know. I think I would turn that opportunity. I would just be like, okay, the Dave Chen name is lost to the sands of time. It's gone forever.
Fair
So.
enough.
But yeah, it's an interesting question of, would you call up your past dates or your past relationships if it meant saving you from legal trouble? Interesting conundrum.
Yeah, so something also interesting happens like during this thing of like calling up the old dates and bringing them to court. I think it's the oncologist who she really gets along with well.
Yeah.
When he's on the stand, I think the language they use in the dialogue really struck something for me. Where I think it's Amelia Book, Renee Lee Goldsberry's character, who says something like, "Oh, were you into her when she was presenting as She-Hulk and this and that?" And like She-Hulk is a very light show, so there's not that much going on beneath the surface thematically, and it seems to have like accidentally stumbled onto like very unintentionally onto like a trans allegory that it's probably not going to do anything with. And this is not the first time Marvel has like done something like this, where like accidentally it stumbles upon like this really volatile imagery that it's not going to do anything with. Like in the Loki show, for instance, you had like these very very like Nazi-esque time cops
Mhm.
chasing, two Lokis, and we had no indication of like why they were doing this yet. But all that we knew about these two Lokis is that they're mischief makers and they're both bisexual. It's like very accidentally you've created a show where like Nazis are
Mm.
chasing down queer characters, and like very accidentally here you have a trans allegory
Well,
about
let's
like
let's
bodily stuff that.
you're being pretty uncharitable when it comes to accidentally. I
Okay,
mean,
let's not say accidentally. Let's
yeah,
not say accidentally. Let's
yeah.
say it is, it touches
Incidentally, I could say
superficial,
incidentally. Yeah, yeah,
incidentally.
yeah.
It touches on pre-existing imagery that people will connect with, in certain ways, and that could be used to, have a more nuanced, more interesting conversation about this stuff. But it's not used that way. It's just used in the sense of like, oh, green, not green, that kind of thing.
Right. But I think you're saying like the idea of presenting as it kind of invokes
Yeah,
the idea of transness, basically,
yeah,
right? And
yeah.
uh, and I would agree. I don't think it's really going to do anything that interesting
No,
with that.
no,
If
no,
I had to
no.
guess, I think it. But if we read it at face value, or if we read it, if you take the sort of more closely available allegory, right? What would it mean for Jennifer Walters as a woman, right? Just that
Hmm.
um, perhaps there's a version of her that is presented to the world that people are more in love with than like
Yeah,
who she actually feels like she is inside, right?
yeah.
So I think it does work on that fundamental level. It's not like it doesn't
Hmm.
work on that level; it only
No, of
works on the other
course.
level.
Yeah.
But I agree that there are other layers you could read into it that I don't know if the show will go anywhere with. So the episode ends with She-Hulk getting a new outfit. We don't
Which we
see
don't
it.
see. Yeah.
Yeah, and then there is a Daredevil helmet. And it's really weird because I don't think there is a post-credit scene in this episode.
Mm-mm.
So the whole time they've been like, "Hey, wait for the post-credit scene. There's cool stuff in the post-credit scene. It's a good one." And then this is a thing that would have been perfect in the post-credit scene. They don't put it in the post-credit scene. There's just like bizarre decisions like that kind of make you feel like, what is going on here?
It's
Like,
such a weird way to end the episode too, because you're like,
yeah,
you're waiting for her to because what is this scene like? Okay, she is going to pick up her new outfit or
yeah,
outfits,
yeah.
which are both referenced, which she both tries on behind these curtains. Because again, like it just feels like, oh, somebody forgot to render this scene entirely before the episode went up. But no, and then the way it ends is also really weird because like, yeah, we know who Daredevil is. But like, what is the relevance of Daredevil having the same fashion designer as She-Hulk? And also, is Daredevil the kind of character that would go to Luke Jacobson? Did Luke Jacobson pursue Daredevil? Is that what's
Mhm.
going on?
I hope we find out.
Yeah.
Siddhant. So anyway, yeah, it's a bizarre way to end the episode with like putting the post credit scene in the actual episode itself. Just very weird, very weird. So
Oh, we
anyway,
haven't mentioned the most important thing.
what is that, Siddhant?
Ched shows up again
Oh yes, Ched.
and condescends to Jen about how trademark works.
Yes, so important, so important.
Yeah.
So anyway, I am curious to see how Daredevil is going to tie into this. Obviously, they're both lawyers, so I assume it's going to be a legal matter. But
I didn't even consider that. You're right.
are you messing with me, or are you being
No,
serious?
no. I was like, oh, Daredevil, right? Superhero, street level superhero. That's right. I completely forgot that he's a lawyer, and I love Daredevil. Like I
Yes.
know who Matt Murdock
Clearly,
is.
we are experts that you should be listening to about the MCU. I just want to put that out there. So thank you for bolstering our credibility, Siddhant.
Oh god.
Anyway, he is Siddhant Adlaka. I am David Chen. You can find more episodes of this podcast at podcast.decodingtv.com. Find us on YouTube at youtube.com/decodingtv. And I do want to call out that there is a big announcement that's happening next week. Decoding TV, in addition to covering She-Hulk Attorney at Law and The Lord of the Rings of Power, will also be covering the new Star Wars show Andor premiering on Disney+.
Ooh.
And I am going to be working with a different co-host for that show that I am very excited to announce. It's going to happen probably next Tuesday when that episode is going to come out. So
Yeah, David doesn't like me anymore, but I will say I am excited about this new co-host.
Siddhant knows who it is, but yeah, I'm very excited about it, and I do like Siddhant. Just I want to make that clear. That was a joke. Okay. All right, but tune in next week to find out who is going to be my co-host for Andor. That's going to be a lot of fun as well, and we hope you are enjoying listening to Decoding TV. Thanks for tuning in this week. We'll see you later.